Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down complex topics using the source material itself. Today, we are getting into something huge, the halal economy. It's a global force that sits right at the intersection of faith, big money, and, as you'll see, some really intense controversy. So let's jump right in. Picture this, November 18th, 2023. The government of Uttar Pradesh, one of India's biggest states, does something pretty shocking. It bans most halal-certified products. An action that drastic immediately makes you wonder, why on earth would they do that? Well, to understand the ban, you gotta understand the word at the center of it all, halal. It's an Arabic word and it simply means permissible. In Islam, this is a core concept that touches on a lot of parts of life, but for most of us, it's most famous for its rules about preparing food. But here's the thing, halal has evolved way beyond just a personal religious practice. It's now a formal, global system, a certification industry that has pushed into areas you would probably never, ever expect. Okay, so for meat, getting that halal stamp of approval means following a very specific ritual. A Muslim has to perform the slaughter, they have to use a razor-sharp knife for a single cut, and there's a spiritual side to it too. The animal faces Makkah, and Quranic verses are recited. This is really different from other methods, like jhatka, which is all about instant severance, or mechanical stunning. But the story doesn't stop at the butcher shop. Not even close. What started with meat back in the 70s jumped to non-meat stuff by 1993. And today, the halal label is on an absolutely mind-boggling range of things. We're talking cosmetics, medicines, entire apartment buildings, even baby diapers. And you know, when you see that kind of incredible expansion, you know what comes next, right? Money. We're talking about a massive global economy, and the numbers here are just staggering. $3 trillion. That's not a typo. According to the source material, that's the estimated size of the global halal market right now. It's this incredibly powerful economic engine that touches almost every industry you can think of. And this isn't some static market either. It is exploding. It's projected to more than double in just the next few years. And check this out, it's not just happening in Muslim-majority countries. We're seeing huge halal markets in places like Germany and, of course, a massive one in India. So how does a trillion-dollar economy keep running? Well, it's mostly funded through certification fees that businesses have to pay. Here's a look at the fee structure from one of India's biggest certifiers. Companies are paying for registration, for each individual product, for printing the logo, and even for the auditors who come to check things out. Now, this kind of explosive economic growth's funded by all these fees, it hasn't gone unnoticed, not by a long shot. It's actually sparked some major controversy and pushback, which, you guessed it, brings us right back to that ban in Uttar Pradesh. So let's unpack the arguments that are really driving this thing. One of the big flashpoints that the sources highlight was an Indian government rule about exports. At one point, the Food Export Authority made halal certification mandatory for all meat being sent out of the country. And the alleged consequence? Non-Muslims in the meat business were pretty much shut out of that incredibly lucrative export market. That rule was eventually overturned in 2021, but only after some huge protests. This kind of economic pressure feeds into a wider fear for some critics, a fear of a much bigger social shift. You can see that perspective really clearly in this quote from a social scientist, Chandrasekhar Singh. He frames the spread of halal-only options as a kind of creeping Islamization, arguing that it creates exclusion for people who aren't part of that faith. And that leads us straight into the next big argument, the idea of a halal tax. The claim is pretty simple. All the certification costs we talked about, they get baked into the final price of the product. So the argument goes, all consumers, no matter what they believe, end up paying for a religious process they might not even want or need. But the controversy doesn't just stop with economics. It gets a lot more serious. We're now moving into the world of national security and major legal battles. Things escalate with a really serious allegation that's highlighted in the source material. It comes from author and activist Harinder Sikka. He claims that the Charter for Jamiat Ulema Hind, that's the same certifying body whose fees we just looked at, states that it's their duty to use their money to provide legal aid and the best facilities for people accused in terror cases. Now, to back this up, critics point to what they say is a long history of the organization getting involved in high-profile terror cases. This timeline, which is drawn right from the source material, shows instances like legal aid being offered after the Ahmedabad serial bomb blasts and for the terrorists convicted in the Pune German bakery blast. The sources claim the total number of terror-accused individuals defended by the organization is now over 700. So you put all of this together, the economic arguments, the social concerns, and these really serious legal allegations, and what you get is a growing pushback. And it's not just coming from activists anymore, it's coming from everyday consumers and even governments all over the world. The whole philosophy driving this pushback is often summed up by advocates with stories like the one about the starfish. You know the one. The core message is that individual choices, even if they feel tiny in the face of a giant system, can actually make a difference. And that philosophy has been turned into a very direct call to action for consumers. The sources lay out a simple 3-step playbook for people who object to the system. First, check the labels. Second, ask restaurants and hotels where their meat is from. And third, if it's halal certified and you don't need it to be, make the choice to buy something else. And you know what? These individual actions seem to be adding up and having real-world impacts. We saw how protests got that export rule in India reversed, businesses are responding by opening jhatka-only restaurants, and even governments are getting involved. Sri Lanka banned halal certification altogether, and diplomatic moves led Malaysia to change its import rules for a big Indian dairy company. Which brings us to this final, really complex question that kind of wraps up the whole debate. Is halal certification just a religious practice, making sure things are okay for a community of faith, or has it morphed into something else, a powerful parallel global economy that's creating social and political consequences that maybe no one ever intended? The source material lays out a fierce debate on this, and it really leaves us to think about where that line is actually drawn.